My father disowned me at my own wedding for marrying a grease monkey with empty pockets. My wife smiled and said, "We don't need it." 6 months later, Dad went white when her name appeared on a screen in front of 500 people as founder and CEO of the company he had been begging to partner with. My father tapped his champagne glass at my wedding reception, and I felt the sound in my spine before I fully understood what it meant. The room went quiet. Not because people respected him. Because people had learned that Victor Carlisle's attention usually arrived before damage. He stood from a table he had not been assigned to. That detail mattered. Mara and I had made a seating chart. We had argued over it for 2 nights in our apartment, moving little paper names across the kitchen table until everyone we loved had a place. My father was not supposed to be near the front. He was not supposed to have a table of his own business partners sitting around him like witnesses. But Victor Carlisle had arrived with his own audience. Developers, attorneys, donors, board members, men who laughed too quickly at his jokes, and women who watched him the way people watch weather that might become dangerous. By the time dinner began, the wedding no longer felt like the small West Loop reception Mara and I had planned. It felt like a room my father had acquired. He held his champagne glass at chest height and smiled that careful public smile he used in photographs for charity galas and zoning victories. "I have something I'd like to say about my son's choice." My hand tightened around the stem of my water glass. Mara sat beside me still. Victor turned slightly so the whole room could see his profile. "From this moment forward," he said, "Evan Carlisle is no longer my son." A sound moved through the room. Not a gasp. More like everyone's body realizing at once that this was not going to be a toast. "No inheritance," he continued. "No trust fund. No claim to Carlisle Holdings. No future interest in any Carlisle property, partnership, or family asset." He looked directly at me then. Not as a father. As a man terminating a contract. "You wanted to marry beneath this family," he said. "Congratulations, Evan. You may now live beneath it." Then he lifted his glass. "To love," he said, making the words sound like a defect. And drank. I want to say I stood up. I want to say I defended my wife with a speech sharp enough to cut through the room my father had built around us. But the truth is simpler. My hand went under the table and found Mara's. Hers was already there. Steady. Warm. No tremor. That was the first thing I noticed. Not my father's face. Not the 280 extra guests pretending not to enjoy the destruction. Not the phones tilted low in people's laps. Her hand did not shake. Mara looked at me before she looked at Victor. That mattered. She checked me first. Not because she needed permission. Because whatever happened next, she wanted me to know we were still on the same side of the table. Her thumb moved once across my knuckles. Then she turned toward my father. Victor was still standing, champagne glass in hand, wearing the faint smile of a man who believed he had just removed oxygen from the room. Mara smiled back. Small. Almost private. "We don't need it," she said. No anger. No performance. Just a sentence placed cleanly in the silence. A few people shifted in their seats. My father's smile tightened. He had expected tears, maybe outrage, maybe for me to fold under the weight of the Carlisle name being pulled away from me in public. He had not expected my wife to sound relieved. Victor looked her over, from the oil-dark scar near her wrist to the simple gold band on her finger. "You own a garage in Pilsen," he said. Mara nodded. "I do. Worth less than my watch." Her smile did not move. Then keep the watch. My name is Evan Carlisle. I was 32 years old when my father disowned me in front of almost 300 people and called it a toast. Victor Carlisle owned enough of Chicago that people sometimes described it as a joke and sometimes did not. Office towers, luxury apartments, 2 hotels, industrial land along corridors most people drove past without realizing those empty-looking acres were worth more than entire neighborhoods. Carlisle Holdings was not just his company. It was his religion. And I had been raised inside it like an heir, a project, and a liability, depending on how useful I was being that year. My mother, Margaret, died when I was 10. I remember her mostly in fragments. The smell of her hand cream. Her laugh from the hallway. The way she used to put her palm on the back of my neck when I was upset, not to hold me still, but to tell me I was allowed to be. After she died, my father treated grief like a staffing problem. The house kept running. The drivers kept arriving. The tutors kept coming. Dinner still happened at 7, even if nobody at the table knew what to do with the empty chair. Victor had plans for me before I had language for wanting anything else. Schools chosen for network. Internships arranged through men who owed him favors. A career in brand strategy because he said I needed to understand how perception becomes leverage. Women introduced at fundraisers because their last names belonged to families with useful boards, useful land, useful money. In my father's world, love was not a reason. It was a weakness people dressed up when they lacked better options. He did not raise me to be happy. He raised me to be placed. Mara Reyes was the first choice I made that belonged entirely to me. When I was 16, my father sat across from me at the dining room table and told me love was what people talked about when they had nothing worth protecting. I remember the table more than I remember what we ate. Dark walnut. 12 chairs. Only 2 of them occupied. The chandelier above us throwing light over silverware that no one in that house had ever washed by hand. Victor had a folder beside his plate. Not a phone. Not a casual note. A folder. Inside were brochures from 3 universities, a list of summer programs, and the name of a girl whose father owned a freight company with warehouse land outside Joliet. I had met her once at a charity auction. She was nice. That was all. My father slid the folder toward me with 2 fingers. You need to start thinking in terms of position, he said. I'm 16. That is late. He said it without irony. That was the thing about Victor. He did not sound cruel when he said cruel things. He sounded efficient, which made people confuse the two. I opened the folder because not opening it would have turned dinner into a fight, and fights with my father were never about volume. They were about endurance. He could sit in silence longer than anyone I knew and make you feel like the weaker person for needing air. A Carlisle marries for position, he said. You choose someone who strengthens the structure. I looked at the girl's name on the page. She's a person. So are bankers, he said. That doesn't make their value sentimental. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it shocked me. Because it explained him. My father saw people as assets, liabilities, doors, or obstacles. The tragedy was that he truly believed this made him honest. For years, I tried to become the version of myself that made sense to him. The right schools. The right internships. The right dinners. The right women with the right last names. But every choice he approved of felt like wearing a suit tailored for someone who only looked like me from a distance. I met Mara Reyes on a Tuesday morning in March because it was raining hard enough to make the city feel personal. I had taken the wrong stop on the Blue Line after a client meeting that had gone badly in the quiet corporate way, where everyone smiled and nobody meant what they said. My umbrella turned inside out 2 blocks from the station. By the time I ducked into a coffee shop in Pilsen, my coat was soaked through at the shoulders and my shoes made that soft, humiliating sound wet leather makes on tile. Mara was at the counter. Flannel shirt. Dark hair pulled back. A smear of motor oil near her left cuff. Hands rough enough that I noticed them before I noticed her face. Not in a romantic way at first. In the way you notice evidence. Calluses. Small scar across one knuckle. A woman who used her hands for work and did not apologize for what work left behind. She held the door open for an older man, leaving with 2 coffees. Then she turned back to the menu like she already knew what she wanted, but had enough time to read anyway. That struck me. Most people in my father's world treated time like a weapon. Mara treated it like something she owned. We ended up at adjacent stools because the shop was full and the rain had trapped everyone inside. She glanced at my ruined umbrella. That thing give up on you, or did you insult it first? I looked at the bent metal ribs. Probably both. She laughed. Not polite. Actual. It changed the room for me. We talked for almost 3 hours. She told me she owned an auto repair shop 8 blocks away, a place her father had started and she had taken over after he got sick. She talked about engines like they were puzzles with consequences. She told me about a customer with an old Buick she refused to give up on because the man had driven it since his wife was alive, and sometimes machines carried more history than people admitted. She asked what I did. I said brand strategy. She asked what that meant. I gave the usual answer. She asked 3 follow-up questions specific enough to make me stop performing. When the rain finally eased, she walked with me to the corner. I don't know your last name, she said. Does it matter? She thought about it. No, she said. She said. Does it matter? She thought about it. No, want to know what makes you laugh. No one had ever asked me that before. I did not tell Mara my last name that morning. That was not a strategy at first. It was relief. For 3 hours, I had been a wet man in a coffee shop with a broken umbrella and a job that sounded less impressive once someone asked what it actually meant. Not Victor Carlisle's son. Not a future asset. Not a name attached to buildings, donations, lawsuits, and dinner invitations that were never really invitations. Just Evan. So when Mara asked my last name and then decided it did not matter, I let it not matter. For 2 weeks, we met at that same coffee shop. Friday morning. The next Tuesday. A Saturday when she came in with grease under one fingernail and apologized to the barista because she had forgotten she was still carrying a socket wrench in her jacket pocket. I learned she liked old soul records, hated performative humility, and believed anyone who said cars had no personality had never listened to one long enough. She learned I drank coffee too fast, hated networking events, and had a bad habit of answering simple questions like I was being cross-examined. On the 14th day, I told her. Carlisle, I said. She looked up from her coffee. As in Carlisle Holdings? Yes. I waited for the shift. The calculation. The little rearrangement people do when a name turns into access. Mara only blinked once. Huh, she said. Then she took another drink of coffee. That explains the coat. I looked down. What's wrong with the coat? Nothing, she said. It just looks like it has its own attorney. I laughed before I could stop myself. She smiled. And nothing changed. My father had Mara investigated within 72 hours of learning her name. He did not ask to meet her first. That would have required treating her like a person before evaluating her usefulness. And Victor Carlyle did not work in that order. He summoned me to dinner the following Thursday. Summoned is the right word. My father's invitations were never questions. They were calendar entries with food attached. I arrived at the Gold Coast house at 7. Dinner was already on the table. Victor sat at the head of it with a file beside his plate, the same way he had when I was 16, and he tried to plan my future like a development parcel. He did not wait for the first course. "Mara Reyes," he said. I put my napkin in my lap. "What about her?" "No significant assets. No investment portfolio beyond a retirement account. No family money. No board affiliations. No political connections. No relevant philanthropic presence." He said each sentence like he was reading a building inspection. "Dad. She owns an auto repair shop in Pilsen." "Yes." "A garage." "Yes." He set his fork down. "This is who you're spending your time with." "She's smart." "So are mechanics who know where to hit an engine block with a hammer." My jaw tightened. Victor noticed. He always noticed small reactions and mistook them for leverage. "She has no network worth mentioning," he continued. "No access. No strategic value. She brings nothing to the Carlyle name. She makes me happy." That irritated him more than an insult would have. "Happiness is not a structure," he said. "It cannot hold weight." I looked at the file beside his plate. Pictures, probably. Addresses. Tax records. Maybe old business registrations. A life reduced to paper by a man who believed paper was only useful when it gave him control. Victor leaned back. "You are confusing warmth with worth." "No," I said. "You are." His eyes went cold then. Not angry yet. Interested. Like I had finally become a problem that required handling. Victor cut off the credit cards the next morning. Not all at once. That would have looked emotional. He did it the way he did everything else. Cleanly. Administratively. One card declined at lunch with a junior partner from a firm I had been trying to move into for 6 months. Another failed later that afternoon when I tried to order a new phone charger from my office. By evening, every account still tied to Carlyle Holdings had been frozen or closed. I called his office. His assistant said he was unavailable. Of course he was. My father never stood close to the first impact of anything he ordered. The job call stopped 2 days later. That was worse. Money was simple. Embarrassing, but simple. I could adjust. I could sell things. I could pay for my own life badly for a while until I learned how to do it better. But the silence from the firms told me exactly what he had done. 3 callbacks I had been expecting disappeared. A recruiter who had sounded enthusiastic on Monday became vague by Thursday. A friend at one agency finally told me over drinks, voice low, eyes apologetic, that my name had become complicated. Complicated. That was the word wealthy men use when they want damage to sound like weather. I sat in my apartment that night with my laptop open and understood something I should have understood sooner. My father was not difficult. Difficult men argue. Difficult men disapprove. Difficult men make holidays unpleasant and dinners tense. Victor Carlyle used power like a tool with a grip worn smooth from practice. He was not trying to correct me. He was trying to make disobedience expensive. When I told Mara, she did not look surprised. She only said, "People who love you don't try to make you smaller so you'll fit back in their hand." I said, "People who love you don't try to make you smaller." Remember that sentence. Because it was the first time anyone had described my father accurately without sounding afraid of him. When Mara and I got engaged, my father came to our apartment on a Sunday morning without calling. He did not knock like a guest. He knocked like a man confirming ownership. I opened the door and found him in the hallway wearing a charcoal overcoat, polished shoes, and the expression of someone who had already decided the conversation was over before it started. "May I come in?" It was phrased as a question only because grammar required it. I stepped aside. Mara was in the kitchen making coffee. I could hear the grinder running, then the kettle. Our apartment was small enough that no conversation in the living room could pretend to be private, but Victor still behaved like she was not there. He looked around once. The second-hand couch. The books stacked under the window. The little basil plant on the sill that Mara kept insisting was still fighting. He did not sit. Of course he did not. Sitting would have admitted the room had terms. Victor took out his checkbook. $7 million, he said. Cancel the wedding. For a second, I only looked at the pen in his hand. Black lacquer. Gold trim. The kind of object men like him buy, so even signatures feel like declarations. No. He did not blink. 15 million. Final offer. I'm not for sale. His face changed then. Not much. Just enough. The temperature in the room seemed to drop around him. You will have nothing, he said. No name, no money, no protection. You will spend your life apologizing for choosing less. From the kitchen, Mara's voice came steady over the sound of coffee pouring. Mr. Carlyle, I think you should leave. Victor looked toward the doorway. Then back at me. You're letting her speak for you now? I opened the apartment door. No, I said. I'm letting her finish what I was about to say. For once, my father had no number left to add. He left. The wedding was supposed to be small. 55 people. That was the number Mara and I had agreed on after 3 nights of cutting the list down at our kitchen table with takeout containers pushed to one side and little paper names arranged like a battle plan. Her mother. Her brothers. 3 mechanics from the shop who had known her since she was 19. Noah, my best friend from college, who had volunteered to handle anything involving vendors because he said I became corporate and useless the second a deposit was involved. A few people from my new job. A few old friends who had stayed friends after my father stopped making it easy. That was it. We rented a renovated warehouse venue in the West Loop with brick walls, high windows, and lights strung across the ceiling in a way Mara said made the room feel honest. The centerpieces were small potted herbs because she thought cut flowers looked like something already dying. We wrote our own vows. We picked a caterer from Logan Square because no one knew the owner's sister. It was not a Carlisle event. That was the point. 2 hours before the ceremony, the venue manager called me with the careful voice of a man trying not to sound alarmed while standing inside a problem. Mr. Carlyle, he said, there appears to be a significant additional party arriving. I closed my eyes. How significant? A pause. Approximately 280 people. Victor had come. Not alone. With partners, donors, society reporters, attorneys, developers, and people who owed him enough to attend his son's wedding as if it were a board obligation. They arrived in dark suits and expensive dresses, filling the back of the room with perfume, watches, and quiet calculation. Our 55 people looked smaller immediately. Not less important. Just surrounded. Mara found me near the loading doors. Her dress was simple, cream instead of white, her hair pinned back with one loose strand near her cheek. She looked at the crowd behind me. then at my face. "Let them in," she said. "Mara." She took my hand. "This is still our wedding." I wanted to believe her. Then Victor walked in like he already owned the room. The ceremony itself was almost perfect. I say almost because my father stood at the back of the room with 280 people he had brought like weather, and it is hard to pretend a storm is not present just because it has not started raining yet. But Mara was right. It was still our wedding. Our friend Marcus officiated. He had gotten ordained online 6 months earlier and took the responsibility more seriously than some judges take courtrooms. Mara's mother cried quietly. Noah forgot the rings for exactly 12 seconds, then found them in the wrong pocket and whispered, "I am a professional," loudly enough for the front row to hear. Mara laughed. I remember that laugh more clearly than anything else. We said our vows in front of the 55 people who came because they loved us and the 280 who came because Victor Carlisle had made attendance feel profitable. For one clean minute after Marcus said we were married, nothing belonged to my father. Then the glass clinked. Victor waited until after the first dance, after the first toast from Noah, after the room had softened into dinner and wine and the dangerous illusion that maybe he had come only to watch. He stood. The room quieted because it had been trained to. He spoke about the Carlisle name. Legacy. Discipline. Standards. The old language of men who mistake inheritance for character. Then he turned toward Mara. "My son has chosen," he said, "to attach himself to a grease monkey with calloused hands and empty pockets." The air left my chest. Not all at once. Slowly, like a door ceiling. Phones lifted across the room. Mara did not lower her eyes. Victor smiled at her. A woman who owns a garage in Pilsen and believes proximity to my family makes her respectable. I started to stand. Mara's hand tightened around mine under the table. Not to stop me because she was afraid. To remind me she was still there. Victor looked back at me. "You could have had a future, Evan. Instead, you chose oil stains and rent payments." Mara leaned slightly toward the microphone Noah had left on the table. Her voice was calm. "Victor," she said, "you keep describing work like it's a disease." The room went still. Victor's smile thinned. Mara sat back. And for the first time that night, my father looked less certain of the silence he had made. That was when I noticed the silver-haired man. He was standing near the edge of the room, just beyond the last row of tables my father had filled with people who owed him favors. He did not look like one of Victor's guests. That was the first thing I registered. Victor's people had a certain posture, forward-leaning, polished, hungry in quiet ways, always watching the most powerful person nearby so they could laugh at the right moment or move when the room shifted. This man was different. Mid-60s, maybe. Dark suit. No visible name tag. No champagne glass. He stood with both hands loosely folded in front of him, watching my father speak with the calm attention of someone studying a system under stress. When Mara told Victor he described work like it was a disease, the man smiled. Not broadly. Not an amusement exactly. Recognition. Like he had been waiting to see whether she would say something like that. His eyes moved from Mara to my father, then briefly to me. There was nothing rude in the look. But it stayed with me. Because it was the first look that night that did not ask what Victor Carlisle thought something was worth. It asked what was actually true. I did not know his name then. Later, I would learn it was Adrian Sloan. 6 months passed. We were fine. I want to say that clearly because stories like this tend to make everything before the reveal look like a setup, as if the quiet days were only waiting rooms for the dramatic ones. They were not. Those 6 months were real. I found work at a boutique strategy firm in River North, small enough that nobody there had a wing named after my father and stubborn enough not to care when someone warned them that hiring me might become politically inconvenient. The work was good. Cleaner than what I had done before. Less performance. More thinking. Nobody at that firm treated my last name like either a crown or a contamination. After 32 years of both, plain usefulness felt almost luxurious. Mara kept going to the shop. Most mornings she left before 7, hair tied back, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, already thinking through the day's problems before she reached the stairs. Brakes. Transmissions. A parts supplier who lied badly. A customer who thought YouTube made him a mechanic. She came home with oil near her wrist sometimes and kissed me like the day had been long, but not heavy enough to carry into the room. We ate dinner at the small table by the window. We planted herbs on the fire escape because the wedding centerpieces had made Mara sentimental and because I was apparently still capable of believing Basil wanted to live in Chicago wind. Most of it died. One rosemary plant survived. Mara called that a win. We paid our bills. We watched old movies. We went to the farmer's market on Sundays and bought more vegetables than two people could reasonably cook. Sometimes I thought about my father. Less often than I expected. When I did, it felt less like grief and more like the ache of an old injury in bad weather. Present. Manageable. Not in charge. Mara never once said, "I told you so." She never said Victor would regret it. She only lived with me as if the life we had chosen was already enough. And it was. I noticed things during those 6 months. I had always been a noticer. Growing up with Victor Carlyle trained that into me. In my father's house, survival often depended on reading a room before the room admitted what it was becoming. So I noticed Mara's calls. Not the ordinary ones from the shop. Those were easy to recognize. Her voice changed when she talked to suppliers, customers, mechanics, the guy who delivered the wrong brake pads twice in 1 week and somehow still sounded offended when corrected. But sometimes, late in the evening, she would go into the small room off our bedroom that we called an office because there was a desk in it and not much else. Her voice on those calls was different. Quieter. Sharper. Fewer words. The voice of someone who did not need to impress anyone because everyone on the call already understood why she was there. I noticed the second laptop. Slim. Graphite gray. Never on the kitchen table. Never used for recipes or bills or streaming movies when mine died at 40% for no reason. It stayed in the office, usually closed, sometimes open when I passed the doorway and saw dashboards, documents, diagrams I could not read fast enough before Mara tilted the screen down. Not with panic. Not like someone hiding betrayal. More like someone closing a door because the room behind it was not ready for visitors. I noticed the trips. Austin for 2 days. San Francisco for 4. Seattle overnight. She called them supplier meetings, infrastructure visits, boring work things, and in a narrow sense I believe those descriptions were probably true. Mara did not lie well. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. But truth can be partial without being false, and I could feel the edges of something larger around the facts she gave me. One Thursday night, she came home from San Francisco carrying that quiet weight again. Not distance. Never distance. Just something held carefully. I watched her set her keys in the bowl by the door and leaned both hands on the counter for one breath too long. "Mara," I said, "is there something I should know?" She looked at me. Completely. "Yes," she said. My chest tightened. "But not yet," she added. "Soon." I nodded. Because with Mara, soon had never meant never. I did not ask her to explain that night. That matters. My father had taught me that unanswered questions were weaknesses in a structure. Something to expose. Something to force open. Something to use until the person holding the answer either surrendered it or broke around it. Mara had taught me something else. Some doors stay closed because the room behind them is dangerous. Some stay closed because the person inside is still arranging the truth carefully enough not to hurt you with it. She stood in our kitchen under the weak yellow light above the stove, still wearing the black jacket she had flown home in, her hair coming loose at the back of her neck. I could see how tired she was. Not physically. Mara could work a 14-hour day and still come home with enough energy to argue with a movie character for making a stupid decision. This was different. This was the weight of timing. "Soon," I said. She nodded once. "I need you to trust me a little longer." I leaned against the counter across from her. "Have you lied to me?" "No." I believed her immediately. Not because I was naive. Because in 4 years, Mara had told me inconvenient truths when easier answers were available. She told me when she was angry, when she was wrong, when she needed space, when something cost more than she had expected, when she was scared and hated saying it out loud. She had never used truth like my father used money. As pressure. As leverage. As a way to make someone smaller. So I said, "Okay." Her face changed then. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. Like she had been carrying a heavy object with both hands, and I had just agreed not to grab it before she could set it down. She crossed the kitchen and put her forehead against my chest. I held her there. No questions. Not yet. By October, I had read 3 separate articles about Helix Grid AI technologies. Not because I understood artificial intelligence at a deep technical level. I did not. My work was strategy, positioning, narrative structure. I understood how companies explain themselves to rooms full of people with money, and Helix Grid explained itself strangely by refusing to explain too much. That was what made the coverage interesting. Forbes had been running pieces on them for almost a year under the same phrase. The Phantom Founder. Helix Grid was valued at $5.2 billion. Its platform handled predictive logistics, energy optimization, and edge compute routing for companies that needed infrastructure to behave intelligently before failure became visible. That was the part one understood well enough to respect. The company was not selling hype. It was selling systems that worked quietly until the absence of disaster became the proof. But the founder had never given a public interview. No conference keynote. No glossy profile. No podcast tour about disruption or vision or whatever word men in fleece vests were using that quarter. Employees described a CEO who showed up unannounced in engineering channels at midnight, knew the product architecture better than most executives knew their own calendars, and rejected almost every press request with the same line. Let the work speak first. I remember reading that sentence at our kitchen table while Mara washed grease from under her fingernails at the sink. I almost read it aloud. For some reason, I did not. Carlyle Holdings had been chasing Helix Grid for 18 months. I knew that from business journals, zoning chatter, and old contacts who still forgot I was no longer supposed to be inside my father's world. Victor wanted a $62 million data infrastructure partnership. Industrial properties. Edge compute conversion. A portfolio play that would make Carlyle Holdings look less like an old real estate empire and more like a company with a future. He had been trying to get in front of Helix Grid's legal and partnerships teams for months. Getting delayed. Redirected. Politely stalled. That amused me more than it should have. Then one night, Mara came home, set her keys in the bowl, and said, "There's a civic tech gala at the Art Institute next Friday." I looked up. Okay. Helix Grid is sponsoring it. Something in her voice made the room go still. "I need you there with me," she said. Not want. Need. So I said yes. The gala was held at the Art Institute of Chicago, in one of those rooms designed to make money feel cultured. High ceilings. Cold light. White tablecloths. Screens positioned with surgical precision. 500 people in dark suits and expensive dresses moved through the space with glasses in their hands, speaking in the low, practiced voices of people who knew journalists were nearby. It was a civic technology fundraiser, officially. Digital access. Infrastructure equity. Public-private partnerships. All phrases I had heard enough times to know they could mean something real or nothing at all, depending on who was paying for the podium. Helix Grid's logo was everywhere. On the step-in repeat. On the programs. On the screen behind the stage. Mara stood beside me in a black dress simple enough to look almost severe, her hair pinned back, no diamonds, no attempt to look like she had entered a world that required translation. She looked calm. That should not have surprised me. It did anyway. People kept greeting her. Not the way strangers greet someone they vaguely recognize. The way staff greet someone whose preferences they already know. A woman with a headset touched Mara's elbow and whispered something. Mara nodded once and said, "Move him after the opening remarks, not before." The woman did not ask why. She just left to do it. I noticed that. I noticed everything. Then I saw my father. Victor Carlyle was 4 tables away, seated near 2 state officials, a venture partner, and a man from his legal team I recognized from childhood holiday parties. He looked polished. Expectant. Hungry in that quiet way he got when a deal was close enough for him to smell. He had been chasing Helix Grid for 18 months. Tonight, he believed he was finally in the room with the door. He saw me. His eyes moved to Mara. A faint curl of contempt touched his mouth, then disappeared. Saw me. His eyes moved to Mara. A faint beneath public control. He still thought she was my poor decision in a better dress. At 9, the lights dimmed. Mara's hand found mine once. Briefly. Then she let go. The woman who took the stage at 9 was not someone I recognized. Mid-40s. Silver earrings. The kind of posture that made a microphone look unnecessary. She thanked the donors, the city partners, the nonprofit directors, the sponsors who had written checks large enough to have their logos projected behind her. Then her tone shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough for 500 people to feel the next thing coming. "For the first time in Helix Grid's history," she said, "our founder and CEO has agreed to address the public in person." The room changed. It leaned forward. That is the only way I can describe it. 500 people, all trying not to look too eager while becoming exactly that. Across the room, my father adjusted his tie. I knew that movement. Victor Carlyle adjusting his tie meant he believed proximity was about to become opportunity. He had spent 18 months chasing this company. 18 months of calls, introductions, legal requests, partnership proposals, delayed meetings, and polite deferrals that must have felt to him like incompetence from people too small to understand who he was. Now he sat 4 tables away from the stage, eyes fixed forward, waiting for the person who could finally open the door. The woman at the podium smiled. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Helix Grid AI Technologies. Mara was no longer beside me. I turned. Her chair was empty. The air left my lungs before the name landed. Mara Reyes. For a second, the room did not move. Then the screen behind the stage lit up. Mara Reyes, founder and CEO, Helix Grid AI Technologies. Valuation, $5.2 billion. The applause hit like weather. People stood. Not politely. Fast. My wife walked onto that stage in the same black dress she had been wearing beside me 10 seconds earlier, calm as turned. Her chair was empty. The air left my lungs before the name landed. Mara Reyes. For a second, the room did not move. Then the screen behind the stage lit up. Mara Reyes, founder and CEO, Helix Grid AI Technologies. Valuation, $5.2 billion. The applause hit like weather. People stood. Not politely. Fast. My wife walked onto that stage in the same black dress she had been wearing beside me 10 seconds earlier, calm as if she had simply crossed a kitchen to refill her coffee. I did not look at the screen again. I looked at my father. Victor had gone still. Not angry. Not calculating. White. The color had drained out of his face in a way no expensive suit could hide. He looked at Mara. Then at the screen. Then at me. And for the first time in my life, my father understood he had mispriced the entire room. I did not feel betrayed. That surprised me. Maybe it should have been the first thing I felt, standing in that room while my wife's name glowed 20 feet high above a company valuation larger than some countries' budgets. But betrayal requires a lie in the place where trust was supposed to be. And Mara had never lied to me about who she was. Not really. She had told me she built things. She had told me she owned the shop. She had told me she understood systems, failure points, people who talked too much, and machines that only revealed the truth when you stopped forcing them to behave. I had assumed the scale was small because I had been trained by my father to measure people by the room they entered with. That was not Mara's failure. It was my inheritance. She stood at the podium under the Helix Grid logo, and all the pieces I had filed away started arranging themselves without asking permission. The second laptop. The late calls. The San Francisco trip. The Austin supplier visit. The staff at the gala moving when she spoke. Adrian Sloan at our wedding, watching my father insult her with the contained patience of a man witnessing someone burn down his own bridge. And the garage. That was the part one understood last. The shop had not been a disguise. It had been the first place Mara owned where nobody needed her to become impressive before they respected what she could do. Her hands were still her hands. The calluses were real. The oil stains were real. The woman who rebuilt an old transmission because the customer loved the car too much to let it die was the same woman who built Helix Grid. The money had not changed her. The title had not made her larger. It only made the room finally see the size she had been all along. Across the room, my father sat frozen beneath the weight of his own mistake. But I was not watching him anymore. I was watching my wife. And I understood why she had waited. She had wanted to know if I loved the person before the world announced the portfolio. Mara spoke for 20 minutes. I remember that clearly because the room did not move the way rooms usually move during speeches. No restless shifting. No phones checked under tables. No half-listening while waiting for the dessert course or the next person worth networking with. 500 people listened. Not because she demanded attention. Because she had it. There is a difference. She started with infrastructure, not herself. That was very Mara. She talked about systems nobody notices when they work and everybody blames when they fail. Power grids, freight routes, emergency logistics, rural broadband nodes, hospital supply chains. She said the future was not going to be built by louder dashboards or prettier promises. It would be built by systems that saw strain before people became victims of it. Her voice was steady. Precise. No filler. No attempt to charm the room into forgiving her intelligence. At one point, she described a routing failure in a winter storm that had delayed medical supplies across 3 counties. Then she walked the audience through how Helix Grid modeled the weak points, predicted rerouting pressure, and cut delivery delays by 40% the next time the weather hit. People leaned in. Investors. Reporters. City officials. Men who would have ignored her in a garage uniform were now writing down her sentences like they had discovered scripture with a balance sheet. Mara did not smile much. When she did, it was usually at the work. Not the applause. Not the valuation. The work. And that was when I understood why my father had never stood a chance. Victor knew how to dominate rooms. Mara knew how to build things rooms depended on. Those were not the same skill. When she finished, the applause rose again, immediate and heavy. She waited for it to settle. Then she looked across the room. Not at me first. At my father. Not cruelly. Not dramatically. Just long enough for Victor Carlyle to understand that the woman he had called empty in front of 280 people now had every important person in the room waiting for her next decision. Mara stepped down from the stage into a room, trying to reach her. That was the only way to describe it. People turned physically toward her as if gravity had shifted. Investors stood halfway from their chairs. Reporters angled for position. City officials adjusted their faces into expressions of access. Mara moved through all of it with calm efficiency. A nod here. A brief handshake there. 2 words to Adrian Sloan, who appeared beside her like he had been waiting for exactly this moment. Then she started walking toward my father's table. I followed. Not because she needed me. Because I wanted to be close enough to see Victor's face when the truth finished arriving. My father had not stood up. That alone told me everything. Victor Carlyle always stood when he wanted to control a room. He stood to greet donors, intimidate contractors, welcome mayors, dismiss employees, and remind sons where power lived. Now he remained seated, one hand near his untouched glass of wine, staring at Mara like the room had rewritten itself in a language he did not speak. Mara stopped in front of him. For a second, no one said anything. The noise around us dimmed into that false quiet rich rooms create when everyone is pretending not to listen. Mara reached into the small black clutch she had carried all night and took out a business card. White. Simple. Her name in black. No gold. No theater. She placed it on the table in front of him. You call me a grease monkey, Mr. Carlyle. Her voice was even. Victor's jaw moved once. You called me empty, beneath your family, worth less than your watch. A few people nearby went still. Mara continued. Whether I was fixing cars in Pilsen or running Helix Grid, I was the same person. The only thing that changed tonight was your ability to benefit from knowing it. I stood beside her, feeling every word land exactly where it belonged. Victor looked at the card. Then at Mara. Then at me. The partnership, he said. Not apology. Not shame. The deal. Even then, that was where his mind went first. Mara nodded once. Helix Grid will not be partnering with Carlyle Holdings. His face tightened. The proposal was competitive. It was. Then this is personal. No, Mara said. It's judgment. She took my hand. I don't reward people who treat their families like assets. Then she turned away. And this time, Victor was the one left sitting in silence. By the following morning, the story was everywhere that mattered to my father. Not gossip pages. Worse. Business press. Commercial real estate newsletters. Tech partnership trackers. The kinds of publications Victor Carlyle read before breakfast and pretended only other people cared about. Helix Grid AI declines Carlyle Holdings partnership after founder reveal. That was the clean version. The sharper pieces said what everyone in that room already knew. Carlyle Holdings had spent 18 months pursuing a $62 million data infrastructure partnership with Helix Grid, only for the deal to be declined after Victor Carlyle publicly insulted Helix Grid's founder at his son's wedding 6 months earlier. No one used the word karma. Business writers do not need to. They have words like judgment, risk, alignment, and reputational concern. Those cut deeper in the rooms my father lived in. By noon, the deal had gone to a competitor out of Milwaukee with fewer properties, less political reach, and, apparently, better manners. That detail made the rounds quickly. Not because people were moral. Because powerful people enjoy watching another powerful person miscalculate in public, especially when they can call it analysis. For years, Victor had taught me that perception was leverage. Now perception had turned around and put its hand on his throat. Reporters called our apartment. I did not answer. Mara's team sent out one statement. Short. Professional. Helix Grid evaluates partnerships based on operational fit, long-term alignment, and leadership judgment. No names. No emotion. No wedding. That was enough. My father's name did the rest on its own. By evening, someone sent me a screenshot from a private real estate group chat. A man who had once toasted Victor at a fundraiser wrote, "Imagine losing a $62 million deal because you called the CEO's wife a mechanic." Then someone corrected him. She is the CEO. I stared at that sentence longer than I expected. Not because it was funny. Because it was the entire story. Victor had not lost the deal because Mara changed. He lost it because she didn't. My father called 3 weeks after the gala. Not through his assistant. Not from the main Carlyle Holdings line. From his direct number. I knew it because I had memorized it when I was 12, back when knowing how to reach my father felt like the same thing as having access to him. It rang while Mara and I were in the kitchen. Sunday morning. Coffee on the counter. The rosemary plant on the windowsill still alive against all reasonable expectations. Mara was reading something on her tablet, one foot tucked under her on the chair, hair loose, wearing one of my old sweatshirts, and looking nothing like the woman who had made 500 people stand in the Art Institute of Chicago. My phone lit up. Victor Carlyle. For a second, the old reflex moved through me. Answer. Manage. Prepare. Be the son who understands tone, timing, damage control, and the exact cost of disappointing a powerful man. Then Mara looked up. She did not tell me what to do. That was one of the reasons I loved her. She only watched me with the same steady attention she had given me in that coffee shop years ago, when she asked what made me laugh and did not care what my last name was. The phone rang again. And again. Then stopped. I set it face down on the table. Mara reached over and touched my hand. No victory speech. No celebration. No dramatic line about finally being free. Just her hand on mine in the quiet kitchen we had chosen together. Later, Victor left a voicemail. I did not listen to it that day. I have not listened to it since. Maybe he apologized. Maybe he explained. Maybe he tried to rebuild the situation into something he could survive being responsible for. I do not know. What I know is this. He thought disowning me would make me smaller. Instead, it removed the last piece of his ownership. Mara went back to work the next morning. So did I. The garage stayed open. Helix Grid kept building. Our apartment stayed too small and somehow exactly the right size. And the man my father called beneath us turned out to be my wife. The woman he could not price correctly. The life he could not buy back. The name on the screen was hers. The choice was mine. And for the first time, both were enough.